The Zarn Dominion had conquered 100 worlds before breakfast. Or, at least, that's how their generals like to phrase it. In truth, most of their conquests involved showing up, flexing their superior technology, and watching whatever unfortunate species they encountered roll over like a scared pet. Their soldiers, towering, cybernetically enhanced warriors with centuries of combat experience, were the stuff of nightmares across the galaxy. The mere mention of their arrival usually sent planets into full surrender mode. So, when humanity refused to bow, the Zarn found it adorable. Supreme Warlord Zyrax, a 10-foot-tall slab of muscle and metal, stood before his command council, reviewing intelligence on this newly discovered species. A massive screen displayed footage of human soldiers training, marching in tight formation, shouting things like "Aurora," and most bafflingly, stabbing sandbags with outdated-looking knives attached to their rifles. Zyrax let out a deep guttural laugh, one that shook the room. Is this their idea of warfare? Primitive sticks? What do they intend to do? Poke us to death? The warlords around him erupted in laughter, their heavy armor clanking as they doubled over. This species doesn't even have energy-based weaponry, one of his advisors sneered. And their melee techniques crude, slow, inefficient. They still rely on steel? That's a joke. Zyrax smirked. Then let us be the punchline. With that, the invasion of Viridian Prime, humanity's outermost colony, was set into motion. The Zarn didn't expect a battle. They expected a formality. When the dropships touched down on Viridian Prime, the Zarn warriors strutted out onto the battlefield with the confidence of a drunk uncle at a family reunion. They weren't just winning this fight, they were making history as the species that had effortlessly crushed humanity before lunchtime. Their commanders barked orders, sending heavily armed troops forward in perfect formation. Metallic boots stomped across the dirt, their armored figures gleaming under the pale light of the planet's twin suns. Plasma rifles hummed in their hands, their shields shimmered in anticipation, and their war cries echoed through the barren landscape. And yet something fell off. There were no human forces waiting in neat lines. No desperate last stands. Just empty trenches and eerie silence. Zyrax, watching from the command ship above, frowned. Where are their forces? His second-in-command, a battle-scarred brute named Krillnox, snorted. Perhaps they have already fled. Typical prey behavior. But the warlord wasn't convinced. Show me the footage again. A screen flickered to life, replaying the intelligence feeds they'd gathered. The footage zoomed in on a group of human soldiers engaged in their bizarre melee training, lunging forward with long knives attached to their rifles. Their movements were aggressive, almost ritualistic. They moved in sync, their expressions fierce. Zyrax watched in silence, his previous amusement fading into mild irritation. He didn't respect their weapons, but the intensity was undeniable. It was almost as if a sudden explosion erupted on the battlefield below. The 1st Zarn Battalion never saw it coming. One moment, they were confidently marching through abandoned human fortifications, chuckling amongst themselves about how easy this would be. The next, half their ranks were swallowed by fire and shrapnel. Then the gunfire started, not the erratic, desperate kind they were used to from lesser species, but precise, controlled bursts. Bullets cut through the air with frightening accuracy, tearing through armor joints, finding weak spots no warrior had ever had to worry about before. Zarn warriors stumbled, their shields flickering under the kinetic assault. They tried to return fire, but the humans weren't just standing there and trading shots. They were moving. And then came the worst part. A deep, terrifying voice roared through the chaos. Fix! Bayonets! Zyrax, still watching from above, blinked. Did he just say? Before he could finish his thought, the humans emerged from the smoke. They weren't running for cover. They weren't retreating. They were charging. Through plasma fire, through explosions, through the bodies of their fallen enemies they advanced. At their front was a human who looked like he'd been carved out of stone, and then given a permanent scowl, Sergeant James Callahan. He led the charge with the kind of unshakable confidence only seen in two types of people, lunatics, and marines. A Zarn warrior, easily 3 feet taller than Callahan, bellowed and raised his plasma sword. He had the advantage. He had the superior technology. He had centuries of training. Callahan bayoneted him in the throat. The Zarn commander, watching from his side of the battlefield, froze. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to be laughing. They were supposed to be winning. Instead, they were dying. Zyrax gripped the arms of his throne, watching in stunned silence. His elite warriors, his invincible, genetically perfected warriors, were getting gutted in the dirt by a bunch of humans with knives on sticks. The impossible was happening, and as the battle raged below, as Zarn blood mixed with the soil of Viridian Prime, a single horrifying thought began to creep into Zyrax's mind. We might have made a mistake. The Zarn had expected a slaughter. They just hadn't expected it to be theirs. Sergeant James Callahan drove his bayonet into the Zarn warrior's throat with a practiced efficiency that made it look almost casual. The alien, a massive brute nearly twice his size, barely had time to register the absurdity of the situation before crumpling to the ground in a heap of twitching muscle and cybernetics. Callahan wrenched his blade free, flicking the dark, oily alien blood off the steel before stepping forward. Around him, his marines were proving a universal truth of warfare. Fancy energy shields and plasma rifles didn't mean jack when a determined human was willing to stab you in the face. Holy hell, they actually die when you stab them. Private Vasquez shouted, planting his bayonet into another Zarn's gut. The creature let out a gurgling screech, claws raking at the air before collapsing. Of course they die. Callahan barked, unloading his rifle into another Zarn who had made the mistake of thinking his shield would hold up. Everything dies when you introduce it to the right amount of ballistic persuasion. The battlefield was a mess of fire, smoke, and panicked alien warriors. The Zarn had expected a simple march through the ruins of human defenses. Instead, they'd walked into a textbook ambush. The first explosions had taken out their front ranks, shattering their neat formations and sending their warriors stumbling into disarray. Then the snipers had opened fire, their rounds punching through armor at the weak points, dropping squad leaders before they could even shout orders. And now came the close combat. Zarn were supposed to be superior in melee. Their generals had assured them that humans were clumsy, undisciplined brawlers with slow reflexes and brittle bodies. But the Zarn generals had never met the United States Marine Corps. The aliens were strong, sure. They had muscle density that could snap a human spine and claws that could turn a lesser man into ground beef. But what they didn't have was experience. Humans, it turned out, had been perfecting the fine art of stabbing people since before the Zarn had even discovered fire. A Zarn warrior lunged at Callahan, his plasma sword humming with energy. Callahan sidestepped the strike, parried with his rifle, and drove his bayonet under the alien's jaw, straight into its brainstem. The warrior twitched, then slumped, and Callahan didn't even bother watching him hit the ground before moving on to the next. He could feel it. Momentum. The Zarn had started the battle with arrogance. Now they were fighting with desperation. Their movements were sloppy, their discipline crumbling with every loss. Their commanders were shouting at them to hold the line, but they weren't used to fighting against an enemy that got closer instead of backing down. One Zarn, panicked and wide-eyed, made the mistake of dropping his rifle and raising his hands. Wait, we? Corporal Jackson put a round between his eyes before he could finish the sentence. Nice try, Jackson muttered, reloading. They always want to talk after we start winning. The battle was shifting. What had started as an ambush was turning into a full-blown rout. The Zarn, realizing that their heavy losses were unsustainable, began falling back toward their dropships. Some attempted to cover their retreat, laying down suppressive fire with their plasma weapons, but human snipers quickly picked off any alien dumb enough to stand still for too long. Callahan saw the opening and didn't hesitate. He yanked his radio from his belt and barked into it. All squads, push forward. Don't let them regroup. You see a Zarn running? You chase his ass down. A roar of acknowledgement filled the comms. Callahan sprinted forward, his boots pounding against the dirt. He vaulted over the remains of a fallen Zarn, closing in on the retreating enemy. He saw a warrior struggling to keep up, limping from a wound in his side. The alien turned just in time to see Callahan coming. Wait! Bayonet! The warrior hit the ground, twitching, and Callahan kept moving. Up ahead, the Zarn were desperately trying to retreat onto their landing craft, some shoving each other in their panic. It was chaos, an army of supposed galactic conquerors reduced to a scrambling, disorganized mob. And then, just as the first dropship doors started to close, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the battlefield. "Stand and fight, you cowards!" The voice didn't come from Callahan. It came from one of them, a massive Zarn warrior, easily the biggest Callahan had ever seen, stood defiantly amidst the retreating soldiers. His armor was thicker, more ornate, his presence demanding respect even among the chaos. This wasn't just another soldier. This was an officer. The warrior unsheathed a massive plasma greatsword, its blade glowing a brilliant blue. He locked eyes with Callahan and pointed the weapon at him. "You," the alien growled. "You are their leader." Callahan wiped some Zarn blood off his cheek. More of a motivational speaker, really? The officer bared his fangs. "You fight like an animal. No honor, no discipline." Callahan shrugged. "I fight to win." With a roar, the Zarn officer charged. Callahan smirked and raised his rifle. Then the damn thing jammed. "Son of a..." The officer was nearly on him. Callahan had two choices. Waste time clearing the jam, or he fixed his bayonet. The massive Zarn brought his greatsword down in a wild arc, intending to cleave Callahan in half. But Callahan ducked under the swing and lunged, driving his bayonet into the alien's side, twisting as he pushed forward. The officer snarled, tried to swing again, but Callahan ripped the blade free and stabbed again, this time driving it straight into the alien's chest. The Zarn staggered back, eyes wide in shock. Callahan leaned in close. "Guess that stick works after all." The officer tried to say something, but only a gurgling sound came out as he collapsed. The remaining Zarn, seeing their leader fall, lost whatever will to fight they had left. They turned and ran, abandoning their dead, abandoning their weapons, abandoning any last shred of dignity. Callahan stood over the officer's body, taking a deep breath as he wiped the blood off his blade. Around him, his Marines cheered, raising their rifles in victory. The battle was over. But the war? That was just getting started. The retreating Zarn moved like a panicked herd, trampling their own wounded in their desperation to reach the dropships. What had started as a glorious march to conquest had turned into an undignified sprint for survival, their massive, armored frames clanking as they shoved past each other. Their commanders, the ones still alive, bellowed orders that fell on deaf ears. Soldiers who had never known fear were now drowning in it. Sergeant Callahan stood among the carnage, reloading his rifle with practiced ease. Smoke curled around him, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood, some human, mostly alien. He watched as the Zarn scrambled for their escape and let out a low chuckle. "Would you look at that? The big bad warriors of the Dominion, running like a pack of whipped dogs." Private Vasquez, standing nearby, nudged a fallen Zarn with the tip of his boot. "Think they'll come back for this guy?" He got no response from the corpse. "Yeah, me neither." "Enough sightseeing," Callahan said, snapping a fresh magazine into place. "They're heading for those ships, and I'd rather not give him the chance to regroup. Let's keep the pressure on." A roar of approval echoed from the Marines as they surged forward, their movements swift and relentless. Unlike the Zarn, they didn't hesitate. They didn't falter. Where the aliens saw chaos and panic, the Marines saw opportunity. The first few retreating, Zarn didn't even get the chance to board their ships. As they reached the ramps, sniper rounds found their marks, dropping them mid-step. The ones that did make it aboard soon discovered that humans had a nasty habit of not letting their enemies leave in one piece. "Fire teams, focus on the engines." Lieutenant Harper's voice crackled over the comms. "Ground teams, cut off their exits." We ain't letting them off this rock without a few souvenirs, like, say, their heads. The Marines wasted no time. Grenades arced through the air, bouncing off holes before detonating, sending fire and twisted metal flying in every direction. One unlucky Zarn, already halfway up a ramp, was blasted clear off his feet, landing with a heavy thud right at Callahan's boots. He groaned weakly. Callahan sighed. "Stay down, buddy. It's over." The alien wheezed something that might have been an insult. Callahan answered with the butt of his rifle, knocking him unconscious. "Tough guy," he muttered. The Zarn officers, realizing their escape was turning into a massacre, made a last-ditch effort to organize their remaining forces. One particularly stubborn warrior, standing atop a wrecked transport, raised his plasma sword and roared, "We must fight! The Dominion does not bow." Before he could say anything else, a sniper round punched through his helmet. A moment of silence. Then Private Vasquez whistled. Man, that guy had a whole speech ready, and everything. The remaining Zarn, leaderless and outgunned, did what any intelligent life form would. They surrendered. It wasn't a graceful surrender. There's a lot of growling, some dramatic chest pounding, and one particularly defiant Zarn tried to swing at Callahan before getting tackled by 3 Marines at once. But in the end, the reality was undeniable. They had lost. Callahan rolled his shoulders, the adrenaline still buzzing in his veins as he surveyed the battlefield. What had once been a proud invading force was now a mess of burning wreckage, lifeless bodies, and humbled warriors kneeling in defeat. Lieutenant Harper strolled up beside him, hands on her hips. "Well, Sergeant, looks like you and your boys broke the biggest rule of the galaxy." Callahan raised an eyebrow. "And what rule is that, ma'am?" Harper grinned. "Never bring a plasma sword to a bayonet fight." Laughter rippled through the surviving Marines, a sound that felt almost wrong against the backdrop of destruction. But that was war. One moment you were knee-deep in hell, the next you were cracking jokes over the bodies of the ones who put you there. Callahan looked over at the prisoners, some of whom still seemed in shock. These warriors, these so-called unstoppable conquerors, had just learned what it meant to bleed, and humanity had just sent the galaxy a very, very clear message. This fight was over. But the war? The war was just getting started. The galaxy had been watching. They always watched, these so-called enlightened species, sitting in their ivory towers on distant worlds, peering through their screens, observing conflicts like they were entertainment instead of life and death. When the Zarn declared war on humanity, the galactic community had already written the ending. It would be swift, brutal, and inevitable. Humanity, the upstart species from a backwater planet, would be crushed under the might of the Dominion. Except that didn't happen. Instead, the Dominion's warriors had fled, their war machines smoldering wrecks, their bodies littering the battlefield. And now, the galaxy had to reckon with something they had never imagined. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were winning. Sergeant Callahan stood amid the ruins of the battlefield, helmet tucked under one arm, watching as the remaining Zarn prisoners were rounded up. The once mighty warriors slumped in defeat, their shoulders heavy with the weight of their first real failure. Some glared, others kept their eyes down, but none spoke. There was nothing left to say. Lieutenant Harper approached, hands in her pockets, looking entirely too casual for someone who had just wiped the floor with one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. "So," she said, nudging a fallen Zarn rifle with her boot, "think they'll be sending another wave?" Callahan smirked. "Only if their leadership enjoys public humiliation." Harper chuckled. "Yeah, something tells me they didn't factor getting their teeth kicked into their grand invasion plans." A voice crackled over the comms. "Lieutenant, you're going to want to see this." Minutes later, Callahan and Harper stood inside the ruins of what had once been the Zarn command post. Among the scattered wreckage and half-melted equipment, one screen remained intact, its transmission still flickering. It was a live feed. The faces staring back at them were alien, representatives of various galactic governments, politicians, military leaders, ambassadors. Some wore carefully neutral expressions, others openly gawked in disbelief. They had been watching. Callahan grinned, stepping closer to the screen. He could practically feel the unease radiating from them. Well, he said, casually adjusting his rifle strap. Didn't realize we had an audience. An alien with deep blue skin and wide, blinking eyes cleared his throat. We were observing the conflict. Harper leaned against the console. Let me guess. You were expecting to watch us get wiped out. The alien hesitated. We had assumed the Dominion's forces would win. Callahan finished for him. Yeah, so did they. A different alien, a tall, spindly creature with shimmering silver skin, folded its many fingers together. This development complicates matters. The Dominion is one of the most powerful military forces in known space. Was Callahan corrected? The gathered officials shifted uncomfortably. A third alien, an old-looking reptilian with scarred scales, leaned forward. Humans, he said slowly, his voice rough. What is it you want? Callahan and Harper exchanged glances. Want? Humanity hadn't started this war. The Zarn had brought it to their doorstep, convinced of their own superiority. But now, standing on a battlefield where human determination had broken a supposedly invincible force, Callahan knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about making a statement. He stepped forward, locking eyes with the assembled leaders. You all watched what happened here, he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of certainty. You saw the Zarn come in arrogant as hell, thinking they could steamroll us. You saw them fall. Hard. No one argued. So here's the message, and you better make sure it reaches every corner of the galaxy, Callahan continued. Humanity isn't here to be conquered. We aren't here to be ruled. You pick a fight with us, you better be ready to finish it, because we sure as hell will. The silence was deafening. Then the reptilian alien let out a low, gravelly chuckle. Interesting, he mused. You fight like predators, yet speak of defense. Callahan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We're human. We don't start fights, but we sure as hell end them. With that, he reached forward and shut off the transmission. The screen went dark. Harper exhaled. Think they got the message? Callahan glanced back at the battlefield, at the fallen, at the prisoners who now understood what it meant to underestimate Earth. Oh, he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. I think the whole damn galaxy did.